Hello and welcome to Series 3 of Autism in Conversation with Auticon, a podcast from Auticon, a global IT consultancy whose consultants are all autistic. This series is designed to help raise greater understanding and appreciation of autism through fascinating conversations with inspirational guests. Hosted by me, Carrie Grant, each episode will feature fantastic guests from all walks of life who share a passion for making the world more inclusive. We'll be talking about the many benefits of hiring neurodivergent talent through to some of the more common challenges faced by autistic adults navigating the workplace, plus much, much more. All of my 4 children are neurodivergent. Hey, so this is a subject very close to my heart. I'm really looking forward to facilitating some great conversations about autism and hopefully learning some new things along the way. I hope you enjoy it too. Hello and welcome to the latest episode of Autism in Conversation with Auticon. Today we're going to be looking at the value autistic people can bring when it comes to bringing a fresh perspective, especially when it comes to innovation. I have a fantastic, incredible panel of guests today who each bring their own insights into this subject, and I can't wait to hear from them. They are Shelley Ferris Smith, Regional Lead at Diversity, Equity, Inclusion and Belonging EMEA at Zurich. We have Sabini-Roberts, LGBTQIA+ trainer, activist and entrepreneur. Kurt Schöffer, Global CEO of Auticon, and Micro-Sculptor WIllard Wigan MBE, no less. Welcome to everybody today. It's lovely to have you with me. Okay, so this is a great panel, but Kurt, I'm going to come to you first because you're the Global CEO of Auticon, and the company is obviously behind this podcast. The backstory behind Auticon and the work you do is such a fantastic example of what we're actually here to talk about today. So can you just explain for us exactly what Auticon is and how it came about, please?
Of course. Thank you, Carrie. First of all, we consider ourselves to be a destination for neurodivergent people. We are a social enterprise. And if you describe the content, we are an IT consulting business providing high-quality tech careers to autistic adults in 8 countries. We are around 400 people these days, and of course keep going and growing the business as we can really feel that it can make a huge difference and have quite significant impact. How did it all start? Dick Miller-Ramos, our founder, he has a son on the spectrum. He was, of course, observing his son, but especially he was in support groups, finding out that basically all the people there had a wonderful education. Some of them had even PhDs and so on. And when he asked the question, what have you been doing? He got very nice answers on their, let me say, education career. And when he asked the second question, what are you doing today? This is where the really disappointing part started. And he heard things like, I'm not working for 3 years. I have never worked, or I'm doing the shelf service in a supermarket, but I have a PhD or I've studied mathematics or whatsoever. And his simple assumption was, this doesn't make sense. We need to change that. And very glad that he had the simple assumption saying, okay, if we are capable to create an environment where our friends on the spectrum can fully focus on their strengths, and we help them a little bit with 2 or 3 things that they might need help with, they should be at least as good as people who are non-autistic. And of course, what he meant is they should be better in certain areas. And after having done more than 1,000 different IT projects, his assumption has proven to be correct. And his assumption still is the backbone of our business.
Absolutely wonderful work that you guys are doing. It really is. For our community, we are super grateful. G, let's go to you. If you could tell us a little bit about how, as an autistic person, you created an entirely new approach to the design business. I do want to say, G is one of the most creative people I know. They are one of those people who has 6 great ideas before breakfast. They managed to put together creativity and entrepreneurial skills working beautifully in tandem somehow, that creativity and business. So tell us about your new approach in the design business that you run.
Firstly, thank you very much. That's a whole stream of wonderful compliments. So thank you. Yeah, a designer, first and foremost. And back in the day when I was back at the design school doing a degree and specializing in brand design, I was taught as everybody else was, this is how you do it. This is how the industry works. We have a client, they write a brief, we complete variations that might meet their requirements. We go back to them, we tweak, we modify, we go back and forth. And that design process has been the tried and tested process that has been used for many years. However, it is incredibly inefficient. And I couldn't stand it.
And long-winded.
Yes, absolutely. So my specialism is brand design. That's what gets me really excited. And I was finding that in order to really create an excellent brand design, particularly in the entrepreneurial world, in the small business world. So I'm not in a corporate setting. I'm not working with big corporate entities. My clients almost entirely are small and medium enterprises or solopreneurs. And we need to have a relationship to be able to create something that works for them. But we also are time poor and sometimes money poor, and we need to do it in a way that is efficient. And the traditional way of working simply isn't. And I accidentally stumbled on this within my first few years of setting up my own business about 8 years ago now. And I just wasn't working with a client. We got together over coffee. They happened to be close enough to do that. And we found in half an hour sitting around their dining table that we created a brand that was nothing like either of us had considered it could be, until we actually got together and we were able to combine in the moment their enthusiasm for their business, their insider knowledge, their expertise with my design skills. And it's wonderful fusion. And it worked brilliantly. And I started to experiment with applying this. And now for the last 5-6 years, I haven't worked any other way. I only work collaboratively. It has wonderful advantages because it's quick. We can create an entire visual brand for a business in half a day because we're right there on the ground and they can say, I don't like that shade of blue. Can we move it a bit to the left? Let's try another font. We can explore together. They sign off instantly. There's no bureaucracy. There's no huge team of people who are all trying to give constructive feedback that basically mean that nothing moves forward for months. We just cut through all of the inefficient aspects of the traditional design process, and it works great. It also means I get to have a lot of fun with a lot of really interesting people. So
yeah, it is like action art, but collaborative, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's collaborative action art. And there's a lot about your business that could teach other people about collaboration, I think. There's a lot in what you do that really is about relationship and communication and obviously creativity. And having worked with you myself, you're an absolutely incredible designer. Let's go over to WIllard. Now, we've heard from WIllard before in previous podcasts, but can you please explain the work that you do? I'm very nervously saying this at this point because some of WIllard's work is just by my right elbow, and it for me, WIllard.
What you're looking at there, Kerry, when you do look, there you are.
It's incredible. Okay. Basically, from the outside, WIllard set up a microscope next to me. There is a box with a needle in it. And the needle looks, if I tried to put a little piece of thread through, it might not go through so easily. Like something maybe in the way of this tiny needle head. Okay, then I look down the lens of the microscope, and what I'm looking at is a golden carriage in all its detail with, is it a cherub?
The cherubs,
A cherub on the front blowing the horn. The detail
and some more cherubs at the back.
Cherubs at the back. Its inside is taking up about half of the needle head.
That's correct. What you're looking at there, Kerry, is the coronation carriage.
Wow. The detail, even on all the spokes of the wheels of the carriage.
Correct. The axle, everything, the whole lot. The painting on the front, which I'll use an eyelash to paint it.
Yeah. I love the fact, because we've got Zoom as we're doing this, all the other 3 interviewees have just dropped their jaws, as they say.
But the actual piece is made from 24 karat gold. And it has about 300 pieces of microscopic bits of gold, fashioned, twisted, bent, and I cut microscopic grooves into it because you can't glue it because it's so small. So I had to manipulate the gold and bend it. And the hard thing about it is you've got to challenge all the external forces, static electricity, any vibration of traffic. And when you're actually putting it together, the tool that I've made is like a little hook, which holds the gold down. There's another tool, which is like a sharpened piece of tungsten. So so you sharpen the point so it's so sharp you can't see the end, and then you have to polish it into a blade, and then I have to manipulate it and then cut the gold and microscopically manipulate it into shape. And whilst doing that, I have to work between my heartbeat to do it. 16 hours a day, I'll keep working. One thing about having autism, it helps me to concentrate on something because I think that's all I can do. And because I think that's all I can do, I take it to an extremity. See, once I've been praised for doing it as a child, because I started as a child, and because when people see it, they go, it's impossible. How have you done that? I say, no, you've seen nothing yet. I want to go even greater than that. So I said, I'm going to tell you something. I didn't use any photograph when I did it out of my head, photographic memory. And if it was scaled down to the size of the real carriage, this would be in proportion, size for size.
No, stop that.
Oh,
How
yes.
do you
Yes.
do this? Like to the naked eye, it's a dot. It's
That's
like
correct.
a
It's
dot.
smaller than a full stop in a newspaper.
It's
without a doubt.
smaller than a full stop in a newspaper.
Because I'll tell you what, I pulled out a full stop, cut out a full stop out of the newspaper, and I put it next to it, and that's a lot smaller than the full stop.
Your mind is just incredible. Your brain is incredible to be able to do this. And also, you mentioned there, WIllard, about 16-hour days. So you also have that incredible gift of focus.
What it is, Kerry, see, when I create this work, it doesn't belong to me. It belongs to the world. It belongs to people to see. At school, my school beginnings was, I think they crucified my school career by just telling me too many times that I was a consequence of failure all the time. And then when you hear that, you think, I've got to get better instead of getting bitter. It was like, there was one teacher who used to have a voice like Miss Havisham in Great Expectations. She used to have this voice that would traumatize you if you heard it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? She said, you're disgusting. Your work is disgusting. Your maths is disgusting. Your arithmetic, everything's disgusting. So therefore, I'm going to take you around the school and introduce you as failure. So when you hear that, not knowing autism wasn't diagnosed then, so when you hear that, I think, well, okay, I'm not going to speak anymore because there's no need to talk. Because now my left leg's in school, my right leg's out. I don't need to be there. So when I found me, I ran away from school. I found my world because I knew that I had to do something because it was like I wasn't accepted in school. So if I speak, it doesn't matter. So I thought, okay. But I decided that I wanted to see if I could do something to be accepted. When my dog destroyed the ants' nest in my garden, that was when I decided I had to build all these houses for ants and furniture for the ants. And because I thought the ants were all homeless, you see, because I used to think ants could talk. I used to pick them up and talk to them. So it's like I went into this world of my world where nobody would see what I was doing. They couldn't criticize me. Nobody could do anything. When I sat by a pond and looked at all the dragonflies, little insects flying around, I found a bit of tranquility. And then when I made these little houses for the ants, and the next door neighbour, one of the kids next door, looked over the fence and seen it. And she was about probably 7, 8 years old. And she went, oh, that's the bestest. And then when I heard that word, that was the signal for me to become what I was about to become, because I heard, it was like being in a shower and all the little droplets of water from the shower washed away all the negative stuff that was said by the teachers at school. So now I said to myself, she just told me I was the bestest. So that's all I can do now. And then when my mother seen it, my mother told me that.
This is a tiny house for an ant.
Yeah. Yeah. Then my mother seen it. My mother said to me that if I make them smaller, my name will get bigger. My mum was...
Your mum was good.
Yeah, she kept encouraging me.
I love the way that she had something to say about it. Everyone else is just like, are you kidding? This is ridiculous. It's so good.
Yeah.
My mum was like, yeah, but you could make it smaller.
Yeah, that's it. So then, autism, right? What autism does, it takes things to an extremity.
Yeah.
So now I'm working like, if I don't do it, I'm going to die. My life depends upon it. So I went up in my bedroom, I broke off a piece of my dad's razor blade, and that's how I made the little houses. I was slicing up little bits of wood and constructing and building things, pulling bits of my school uniform out and tying little knots and building. And I just went, I was possessed because that's it. My life depended upon it. That's what I was saying to myself. That isn't the case now, because when you get old, you understand that there's more to you than just
Sure.
making sculptures. I've got a whole world in a grain of sand.
Yeah. And you have. And it lets us into your world in a way that words, songs, nothing else would let us. The conversation, you just need to look down this microscope and we understand more about you. Let's move on to Shelley. Now, unlike G and Willard, you aren't autistic, but you are one of Auticon's clients. Can you explain briefly what your role is within Zurich and why it was that you decided to work with them, and what benefits have you seen as a result, please?
Yeah, of course. First, Carrie, thanks for having me. Willard, how do I possibly follow that?
We've all got our own skills. There's different types of skills. We're all different. We all got variation of skills. I appreciate anyone with a talent.
Willard, you're being way too kind. We'll all accept second best. It's fine.
No, I'm not.
We're all bowing down in worship. Yeah, go on, Shelley. Yeah.
Yeah. My role or my title is the regional lead for EMEA. So we span across 13 territories for that. And I'm the diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging lead for those countries. To come back to your questions then, how did we begin that relationship with Auticon? I think, and Kurt, tell me if I'm getting this wrong, but I think actually a while back we were approached in our group claims function. And at the time, there wasn't an uptake. So it was, we'll refer you, we'll share the information and we'll refer you on to some of our other contacts. And there was a lady called Fiona Sage, who's terrific. She's always looking for different answers, for different ways of working. And Fiona was really interested in working with Auticon. And I think principally because we struggle as an organization, along with most organizations, we do struggle to find the right talent for some of our really technical roles. So following a conversation with Auticon, we then had our first consultant join us called Lars. And he's somewhat of a celebrity now, I think, within Zurich, it's fair to say. And we saw very quickly the way that he was able to, again, with that single-mindedness, with that ability to concentrate, to solutionize really quickly, was a huge benefit to us. And the innovative piece really came from a different lens, looking at things completely differently to the rest of the team. And it was like a stone in a pool. That ripple effect suddenly made other people sit up and think, what's going on? How has this happened? How has this come to be? So I think from there, really, it was where else can we engage? How else can we look at building that relationship? And we have consultants now, I think, in Switzerland, in Germany. We've just been talking to somebody in the UK about how we can develop that relationship. But let me come back to Germany because that's a fascinating one. So we talked to a manager within the German EU. And again, he was struggling to recruit in a very technical space, getting more and more frustrated by the lack of talent that was coming through. Meanwhile, the projects are backing up. It's starting to get into a really pressurized environment. And again, had that conversation with Auticon to say, can you help? Can you support us in what we're doing? And so the first consultant joined his team. And within a very short space of time, he was simply blown away by this individual's ability to solely focus on delivering something, to come in with a different view, to be really creative about solutionizing. And what was really interesting was that if this individual didn't know something, he would go away, research it, and come back within a really short space of time and say, okay, this is what I propose we do, and this is how I can make it work. So again, I think it was, people were really stunned and amazed that this could happen. And there was a particular example, this is the one that really hit home for me. The project timeline was actually 6 to 12 months. This individual delivered it within 12 weeks. 12 weeks.
Oh my goodness.
So not only have you got that tangible piece of evidence, if you like, that this is what Auticon can do. This is what these individuals who are neurodiverse and autistic within that spectrum, this is what they can deliver. And then it's what I call whack-a-mole, right? So the minute we get success in the organization, you have other countries, other BUs going, we need to know. We need to know what's happening. We need to know how that's working. Absolutely. And how is it happening so quickly? So there are now 3 consultants in Germany. As I say, we're now looking at a sort of a consultant in the UK. And that's really where the relationship is in terms of the consultancy piece. But Carrie, it's expanded. So I talk to Steve regularly in the UK. And I was just saying to your other guests, I get very animated when I talk about this. And I was talking about how we could expand both the offering and the relationship. And we're now talking about learning modules. So it's growing. And I think that's what I love. It's the evolution, celebrating what different is, of how we can incorporate that really into our DNA. And the beautiful thing about Zurich is we are always interested in different, right? So that's the marriage of where we are, I think.
One of the things I love about what you've just said there, Shelley, is that so often when we talk about inclusion, it's based on, oh, let's give someone a chance. There's a sort of almost a pitying attitude about it rather than actually, we can't do this. The neurotypicals are a little bit cut short here. We don't know what to do. Let's go to the people that have the asset. And the people that have the assets on so many occasions are these people with incredible minds, autistic people.
Exactly.
And I love that kind of asset-based way of employing because it's innovative, it's time-saving. There are so many advantages to it. Then we're looking at it from a very different viewpoint. So as long as we are then looking at some of the challenges that may be there and the adjustments that may need to be made in order for that person to thrive in their giftedness, I suppose you could call it, as long as we're providing for that, we then broaden our company's work base, our field, the diversity and inclusion that we can have. And also this lovely word that I love is in your acronym after your job, Shelley, is DEIB, and the B being belonging.
Absolutely.
Because if you know that you're not just being given a job because someone thinks you should, oh, let's give them a chance. That you don't want, that's patronising. You want to have a sense of equality and belonging. The belonging part is so very important. G, I'm going to come back to you. G and WIllard particularly on this one. There does seem to be connection between diversity or divergence and innovation. Both of you speak and in totally different fields. Do you think that's something that, obviously we're not going to stereotype and trope and say everybody that's autistic's an innovator, that would be a bit stupid. But do you think that there do seem to be an awful lot of people with incredibly creative, out-of-the-box minds in our autism community? G, would you say that?
Very much. Yes, I think part of it probably is simply we're wired certain ways. And so our brains work in the ways that they work, and we can come up with different solutions than people whose brains are wired differently. But there's another aspect to it, which is as a neurodivergent person growing up in a neurotypical world, we have had to problem solve every day of our lives. We've found so many things challenging, and we have had to find our own ways through it. And I think WIllard gave a brilliant example in his life story there of taking all of that negativity and channeling it into his utter brilliance. And
thank you.
This is something that we do. It's actually our day to day. We overcome challenges just to get out the door, just to sit down to work. We've already had to carry a higher mental workload than a lot of people do over a whole day. And so we naturally will innovate and have creative ideas. It's the only way we know how to function. If we didn't, we wouldn't get through a day.
That's such an interesting point. Thank you so much.
Sorry,
WIllard,
Carrie. My mother used to say to me, the diamond's in the dustbin. And I asked her what she meant by that. Just to say the best comes from where you least expect. She used to say that society has a habit of throwing things to one side without looking. And that's why I should say, once the lid's been uncovered, they realise what was in there. So I believe that there's so many people out there, just like you were saying early on, with inventive skills. But they feel as though that they have to have some kind of qualification, or they have to be inside the box instead of outside the box.
Yeah.
So when they see what they're capable of, once it's uncovered, it's like a present that hasn't been opened up. Or the reverse of Pandora's box. The reverse. Yes. And you open it up and there's lots of autism in there. Not just autism, people with learning differences that are beneficial to the world in what they can do. And to determine who you are is what you do or what you say or what you invent. And they all feel as though we have to be qualified. We have to have some kind of paperwork to show the world what we're capable of doing. And once they decide to reverse it and have a look what's inside the bin, then they'll see something that they would expect. And that's what society needs to understand. And that's what my mum used to say, the diamond's in the dustbin.
And I feel, Willard, thank you so much for that. I feel like with you and G, you have discovered what's inside you. So you've made that journey of discovery, but you've also both been successful at being able to show other people that gift and that skill and all that you have, all that you've learned. Exactly what G said was so brilliant about the struggle on a daily scale, but also at a yearly, decade scale of what comes out in this decade is another thing that I wasn't aware of. But how do we get better? I'm thinking about these guys. They've uncovered those skills. They've found them, and not only have they uncovered them, but they've managed to take them to market. But there are many autistic people out there that probably have this stuff within them. The diamond is in, right now, it's in the dustbin. How do we get that uncovered? What work can you do? And I asked actually to Kurt and to Shelley, really, to both of you, how do we get better at uncovering the talent?
I would say, if I may start, Shelley, I would say biggest problem why it's not happening is the huge level of standardization we have in the hiring processes. This standardization is really totally counterproductive to what we are trying to do. So this is why we as Auticon, we needed to get totally away from that. When we get an application, basically all we want to know is who is that person? And of course, we're not always finding diamond, but we are already happy if somebody has great cognitive skills, and we can figure that out quite easily. We don't need diplomas. We don't need PhDs, all these kind of things. And I think, let me say that the biggest hindrance of being more successful in this area are really the HR teams, which are still working as they have been working 20 years ago. And as long as they don't get it that they need to change the process, I'm not so optimistic that things will happen. But of course, with partners like Zurich, and Shelley mentioned it, we have now 10 years of experience in that field. And what we want to do the next 10 years is, of course, we will go on with our IT consulting business. But what we especially want is we want to encourage other companies to follow our example. We want to help them with their hiring processes. We want to show them the kind of, all the things we have discovered on this journey the last 10 years. But it's very much a change in mind. And I would say that almost everybody of our consultants has this totally different view on things. What means innovative? Innovative very often means to look at the same thing in a totally different way. And when we started, there's a nice example. One of my colleagues in Hamburg said, Kurt, you need to understand that this is not a bug. This is just a different operating system that we are on. And this different, that's, in my opinion, you can look at the same thing 10 times. You always see the same thing until somebody comes from the side and has a totally different view on it. At the beginning, we called it lateral thinking. And with this lateral thinking, you basically, by definition, come to a different solution. And this solution very often helps our colleagues to be more effective, to be faster, and so on.
Right.
But it is really that approach that differentiates them in a fantastic way from non-autistic.
Yeah, and we want to hear those solutions, like you said, that lateral thinking that can bring solutions that perhaps our neurotypical thinkers won't even have the ability to think like that, perhaps, and an autistic person does have that ability. We want those solutions. Shelley, how can we get better at uncovering some of those diamonds, as Willard calls them?
Yeah, I'd probably go back to what Kurt said. And actually what you referenced earlier, right, is that we're creatures of habit, right? We're quite tribal. So everyone feels very comfortable working in the same way that they've worked or in the same environment that they've worked because it makes us comfortable. And anything challenging around the periphery we don't like it, right? It's a challenge to where we grew up, how we were educated, all of those different things, which ultimately leads to the decision, whether it's conscious or unconscious, to stay doing the same thing. So it's linear, it becomes very siloed. So if I look at the acronym for what I do, it's really simple. And this is the bit I always say to people, this is not complex. Diversity means a different view. And Kurt, exactly as you say, I can look at something, a red glasses case is in front of me. It's a red glasses case. G might look at that and think, I love the shape. I love the curve on that. How can I incorporate that into something? Won't even occur to me. So the equity piece actually for me is more important than the equality, right? Because what we're talking about there is actually recognizing that the differences or the different accommodations we can make for someone who is neurodiverse will yield sometimes a much better result than somebody who's neurotypical. And again, from that, you get the inclusive piece, and then you have that sense of belonging, right? So for me, the challenge is actually having those conversations, not with actually necessarily our execs. I think they're really on board. They understand the benefit, but actually to cascade that down. And the approach I've taken with that is to go roots up, right? I want our employees to understand, to myth-bust, to break stereotypes about what neurodivergence means, what autism means. It's not Sheldon from The Big Bang Theory. It's not Rain Man. And I'm plagiarizing shamelessly from Lars now, because that's exactly how he did a lunch and learn session for us. And that's how he started this off. My name is Lars. I'm autistic and I'm nothing like Rain Man. And it breaks the ice immediately. So I think our challenge is always dispelling that stereotype. I think our challenge is saying to that population who do hire and who work very closely with HR or with talent partners, the clue is in the name, talent partner. This is a talent pool we need to start making more accessible and appreciating that sort of plethora of different views, intersectional lenses that we can actually start to look at. And that's healthy. An organization to evolve and to appreciate a different view, that's where we should be going. So I think it's always an uphill challenge, because we're talking about financial services for any global organization, systemic change, systemic cultural change. And for that, there has to be a level of self-awareness to think, how do I embrace that? How do I incorporate it into how I feel? And that's change. It's a big change. But you know what? Bit by bit, we're going to get there.
And you mentioned there, Shelley, intersectionality and bit by bit. I feel like bit by bit, we are getting there and we're all really encouraged by that. And yeah, let's all give ourselves a big pat on the back. But I still feel when it comes to intersectionality, we are still light years behind. So we can go, oh, here's a straight white man who's autistic. Yes, that's the next person that's allowed in the door.
Silo, Carrie.
But what?
Silo.
It's the silo thing. If we're going to talk about inclusion, actually, G and Willard, let's hear from these guys. It's not just about being autistic, G, is it?
Absolutely not. No. And from an intersectional standpoint, I've got the whole LGBTQ and gender diverse spectrum in me. And I would like to mention actually the wider neurodivergent community as well, because I think what we're talking about here is about specifically autism and finding those diamonds and being able to give those diamonds an opportunity to shine. But what I find is I shine better when I have other precious gems around me. So colleagues I have who maybe have ADHD or dyslexia or other forms of neurodiversity, other ways of thinking. When you put us together, we have that wonderful combination of really different ways of doing things that we can collaborate on and create something bigger, better, faster. So we all have our strengths. And let's be honest, in the autism world, we have weaknesses too. There are things that we find very challenging, but those challenges can be met by collaborating with people for whom those skills are their superpower. And we create this wonderful network of human beings that can enable all of us to shine. And it's not just the autistic community. One of my main colleagues is ADHD, and I love working with her because she's always creating new ideas, and I'm typically saying, right, now let's work out how we create it. Let's do it. So between us, we bounce off each other and end up doing all kinds of interesting new things.
Yeah. Would you say then, and I really hear that, so we're talking about as opposed to neurodivergence, neurodiversity, all the different diversities out there in terms of neuro stuff. Would you say the biggest challenge when you faced challenges, G, has been about being autistic or being LGBTQ, or is it hard to tell why the challenge is coming from outside towards you, or is it a combination?
It's going to depend on context, different situations, but the whole nature of intersectionality is we can't really pull those things apart very well. Yeah. They all impact, they all have a part to play, and together they create all of these wonderful individuals that are deliciously intersectional beings.
Yeah. And for you, Willard, as a black man and an autistic black man, that can be like a double invalidation sometimes in society.
The way I look at it, I don't really look at my pigmentation. I look at my work, and that's what I expect people to do. Because some people can put you into this ethnic sort of category, and they should put me in a human being category, because that's what I am. Yes, I've got autism, but autism is a blessing for me. So, yes, there are some people that want to look at that, but I never give them the chance to look at it. I just got to give them the chance to look at my work because it belongs to everybody. It's a message. That's what my work is. It's like a surgeon said something to me. He says, under supervision, you could perform the smallest microsurgery in the world. And I said, what do you mean by that? He says, under supervision, I bet you could do it. I said, I'm not qualified as a surgeon. He says, you don't need to be with that skill. So that's a natural skill that I was born with, natural.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of kids out there from ethnic backgrounds. They feel as though their pigmentation is going to hold them back. But my mother would always say to me in life, it's not about getting bitter, it's about getting better. And my journey is a message for everybody, regardless to race, colour or creed. It's a message for them to see what can be achieved with someone with autism. And not just autism, people who have lesser ability in certain parts of life, they feel as though that things don't work. It's like sometimes people may feel like a leaf in a cold is blowing around in a circle, not going anywhere. But there's one thing that's very important in life, encouragement. What comes out of your mouth can determine what you're going to become. Just a few words can help. And I think the more we communicate with people with indifferences, the better. Because my mum said sometimes the best comes from where you least expect. And people should understand that and understand that people like myself came from that background. And this is what I've achieved. It's not just about me making small sculptures. It's about the message behind it. I left school with no qualifications whatsoever. If you asked me to tell the time at 18, I couldn't tell the time at 18. I couldn't spell my name till I was 17 when I could spell my name, because I was told by the teachers that I'm a failure. So I accepted what she said, but I didn't accept the fact that she didn't stop me from thinking I was going to become the greatest micro artist of all time. It's the message behind the work. And yes, my work spoke for me, because when people see my work,
There's not much you can say about that.
Yeah, people leave.
You're not coming back from that.
Yeah, they'll leave the exhibition with their jaw in a wheelbarrow.
Yeah,
and the
I've
Queen
been there today. Yeah,
the Queen told me. She said to me, she says, I've never seen anything so small that's meant so much. I made a tiny crown for the Queen on the head of a pin in 24 karat gold. They'd put all the diamonds in. I told her not to wear it because it'll be too small. So she found that quite funny. It's something tiny with a really big message.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? My mum used to say, you can say everything and mean nothing, and say a few words and mean everything.
Yeah.
And I do believe that less can be so much more within reason. And I think in life, we have to find our frontier. We have to show the world that what we have inside, because people who invent things, right? They may be in bed and they wake up in the middle of the night and say, okay, here it is. You can't see it. Just because you can't see it doesn't mean it's not there. And then you go and get to pen to paper, and then you draw something down, or you say something, and what you say, people listen to, and they want to buy what you've said, or they want to get on board with what you've said. And I think, you see, like everybody here today that's speaking today, we all have a message. And that message is, always look at things that you think's not, that isn't there. You think it's not there. You can't see the wind, but it's there.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? If somebody's quiet, you think they've got nothing to say, but they have.
Oh, they have.
If someone who's quiet, if you mess with someone who's quiet, you'll see the temper like you've never seen before. You see what I mean? So always look, turn the coin over and have a look. Turn over the rock and have a look.
Yes.
See what's under there.
Yeah.
Because that's where it is. If you want to see the most beautifulest people in the world, go to the back streets of the slums of Brazil. You'll see some beautiful, different types of people that look stunning, where you wouldn't think they're there. But when you go there, it's like, oh my God, where did that come from? Where did that come from? There should be some kind of a lab school system where they do like a take people out who are supposed to have less, and then put them in a room and find their strengths and call it the lab school.
That sounds like a great way of doing recruitment to me.
Yeah.
Kurt and Shelley, again, I'm going to challenge you guys getting the challenges today. We're just touching on intersectionality here in terms of employment. And we've got these great innovators. We know that they're in our community. We know that they're gifted. Obviously, Auticon is looking for autistic people. But what about if there are other intersections? How well is Auticon doing and how well is Zurich doing on intersectionality? How is it actually doing what it should be doing? Or have you still got a way to go? Kurt?
Yeah, I would say, of course, we still have a way to go. But on the other hand, we basically have been up to that from the beginning, that autistic people, if you hire an autistic person, doesn't mean you hire a 35-year-old white man. It can mean everything. It goes through all different areas. This is also why we have started to, when we talk about our services, we have broadened that and say, we are talking about neurodiversity, really. It's not autism only. It is neurodiversity. When we talk about the services and products we want to produce ourselves and develop ourselves, it's about products for neurodivergent people. And of course, we're still, after 10 years, we're still learning every day and we are willing to learn. And so, there's some way to go, but I would say we are doing pretty well. I would like to add one single thing, an idea to what Willard said, was discovering that the biggest problem until today, and it's almost unbelievable in 2022, people are still afraid of doing it. There is fear out there in the market. And my kind of comment would be, people, guys, don't be afraid. There is basically nothing to lose and there's so much to win. Just try it out. Just step over your shadow and do it. When we started 10 years ago, we were very also that, we don't know and we are afraid. And 10 years later, you still hear that story and I don't get it. There's nothing to be afraid of. So just do it. Just try it out.
My mother used to have a saying, and when I used to try to read, and I couldn't read properly, I used to try. My mum used to say to me, never put a plaster on a cut that needs stitches. That's what my mum used to say to me.
Gosh, yes.
And I kept that one. She'd always say things that would always make sense. We all have a story, and that story is something that people can be inspired by. It's like people see the glory, but they never see the story. They don't see what we go through.
That's what G was saying earlier, every day. Absolutely, just to get out of the house.
Yeah, there was a couple of stages in my life where I said to myself, I don't really need to do anything anymore. And then my mum said, if you read life instead, not a book, just look around and read that. So I did. I didn't need a book. I didn't need academics. I didn't need any sort of PhDs. And I've got a doctorate. That's an honorary doctorate. So I'm quite proud of that, to know that I've got all that from nothing. And there's no such thing as nothing, because there's always something. Something's always there, but I put myself underneath the microscope and I can have a look at my DNA, and my DNA just says one thing. It says the best is yet to come.
I love it. You're so positive. Shelley, what about in terms of intersectionality and the various different presentations that people have in their identity? How I'm challenging Zurich on this. Obviously, you've talked about autism and in such a positive way, the way that you talk about those asset-based employees, which is wonderful. Is there still a way to go in terms of people being autistic and something else? Have you still got a way to go on that?
I've already mentioned the silo, right? So again, it's when Kurt was referencing HR, it's that sort of way of working. But I think the intersectional piece, and actually the intersectionality piece, is what happens if people don't look through that intersectional lens, through that multi-view. It's almost about basics, Carrie, because what we're saying is neurodivergence doesn't pick a black man or a queer female or a disabled it actually can be all of those facets, all of those things.
And socioeconomic, of course, as well.
Absolutely. Social mobility plays a part in this. But when you start having that conversation, you can see again, people are thinking, I can't quite see where this is going, because it's far more comfortable, especially if you're talking about a large corporate or global organization. It almost feels that we have to do this one step at a time. So when I'm talking to our employee resource groups, for instance, and it's like, what are we looking at? So what's our vision? What's our mission? What's our strategy? How do we actually make this land across all of these aspects, across all of these lenses? Because nothing works in a silo, right? It's like building a racing car, isn't it? And saying, there we go, we've got all the kit, leave the steering wheel off there, will you? We'll just come back to that.
Yes.
You're not going to get very far.
Yeah.
And I think what I tend to do is almost, for me, take it back to basics. Let's talk about a multiple view. Let's talk about the way we view the world. And actually, that will be influenced by a whole host of things: where you grew up, how you were educated, the PhD that WIllard is talking about. Why do we need to label? And again, it's a comfort piece. Why must we label anything, really? It's about comfort. It's about that tribal thing again, in terms of, I feel comfortable that we're now focusing on disability. I'm comfortable now, we're now talking about ethnicity. And actually, I was talking again, poor Steve, that gets a regular ear bashing from me, but I was saying, in
This is
order
Steve
for
from
this to
Auticon
work,
that
it is,
pulled all
it's
this
Steve Hill
together.
from
Yeah.
Auticon. He's been great.
Yeah.
And when we were chatting about it, I said, listen, for this to really land, because what I want to do is keep momentum going and actually to embed this into our DNA, right? So that we can really appreciate that hopefully we don't have to have in the future, Carrie, these types of conversations. It just will be. It will just be part of who we are. And I said, neurodivergence is actually a great way to start, because it's not visible. Quite often it's not visible. So people are less uncomfortable, feel less. Some of it's more about, will I offend? Will people be offended if I ask the wrong question? So if we start off from that ground up piece, I think the reality is one of us always will have somebody, there will be somebody in our social circle, somebody in our working environment who will be neurodivergent. Now, whether that person wants to put their hand up and say, I'm neurodivergent, that is me, is a different space and place. So I think, going back to your question, what's the challenge? It's about that learning experience. How do we break those stereotypes? So the sort of learning piece we're doing at Zurich now is, let's myth bust, let's break those stereotypes. The next bit actually will be pitched at those middle managers, that middle management piece where we're saying, do you understand? Do you have an idea of what this is? And have more of a dialogue. We want that powerful narrative, not to be told this is training or this is education, because again, you get that closed bit then. This is more about learning what neurodivergence is all about as a whole. And then that final piece, actually, Kurt, you'll be delighted to know we're targeting at talent teams and HR professionals. And what I'm looking for is to create that holistic flywheel, right? So that if the hiring manager comes back to an HR team and says, not comfortable here, and what does this mean? The talent partner can say, actually, you really do need to look at neurodivergence as a talent pool, and we're closing gaps. We're starting to get that multiple vision, that multiple lens that we can look through then to say, do you know what? We don't need to be linear. We don't need to silo. We just need to recognize the diamond in the dustbin, right?
Yeah.
We just need to turn the rock over to say, this has been here all along. And actually, how do we incorporate that into our culture? How do we do that? So I liken it, Carrie, to chipping away at the mountain face with a toothpick, and one day we hit a fault line, and I've got to follow that up. And we are getting there. We are, but it's going to take more work, more time.
Yeah. It's great that you are committed to the journey, though. So what would you like to see happen in the future to help diversity to thrive? I'm going to go to Kurt and Shelley first, and then finish with our autistic voices. Kurt, what would you like to see? Obviously, here as part of Auticon, what would be, how would you, like, thrive is a big word, isn't it? Yeah, we're really thriving now in this. What would it look like to get that word used?
Yeah, I think I agree with everything that Shelley said. It's a journey. We have been on this journey for quite a while, but honestly, since 2 years, we are feeling for the first time that the wind is coming from the back, not from the front. That means that people are getting it. They understand that diverse people can, and diverse teams especially, can achieve much more than homogeneous teams. And I think thinking about that from a business sense is what it's all about. And we're sometimes kidding and saying in 10 years from now, Auticon will not be needed anymore because we have done our job. I probably don't think that will be the case, because we will hopefully have a few hundred people working on fantastic IT projects. But if we continue on the path that we have seen the last 2 years, I'm pretty optimistic that we are on the right way. And of course, I personally think that we will have more Shelleys supporting the ideas and bringing it into the workforce. We said at the beginning, the fact that there is lack of talent all over the place will help to just acknowledge that. And one day we shouldn't talk about these categories anymore. We should just say we have a fantastic team that doesn't race, color, all these things. We should just not make, it shouldn't be a point to discuss it.
Thank you, Kurt. Shelley, I'm going to throw that straight to you. We need more Shelleys. That's a nice thing about
Thanks,
you.
Kurt.
So what would help diversity to thrive?
Yeah, I think it is to try and stop that linear, that siloed approach, right? And then we are talking about cultural awareness. Self-awareness is probably the biggest thing, and so if I think about my remit across different countries, it's actually tapping into how we communicate. How do people like to be communicated with where it makes sense? And I think if I think about the talent piece, I was in talent for a long time, and it's always down to, you referenced a Narnia drawer before we started, Carrie, and it's exactly that. I have a problem. I have a round hole. Find the round peg to sit in that hole so it's all fixed. And it's actually saying, you know what, with a little bit of work, actually, we can make that round hole far more accessible to other people who might have edges. And actually, they don't need to go in your round hole. They're going to bring something themselves. So it's a learning piece. It's an evolution piece. But I just want to point out something. So Austria are one of our first countries who have readily recruited and actively recruited neurodivergent talent. They actually work with a recruitment consultancy who place individuals on a permanent basis into the organization. And when I asked, how did you do that? How did you actually get the buy-in, right, to actually make it successful? The lady that looks after that team, including HR, said to me, it was a no-brainer. It was just a no-brainer, right? We had these huge holes in our technical teams and our cyber teams. And when we spoke to the agency and started talking about the skill sets, they said, we can help. It's not a problem at all. So somebody was ready there with a solution. But critically, when they went through that recruitment stage, they dispensed with that language. And again, for me, it's all about the language you're using to make it. And they would get somebody in. First of all, they said, do you want to come into the office? What's right for you if you're coming into the office? Are you comfortable? If you're not, we can do it at home. If you don't want to do it with a camera on, whatever you need to feel comfortable, we'll accommodate. So that was the first piece of learning. And then the second piece, if somebody, for instance, did want to come into the office, that conversation, and it was a conversation, started off with, these are the issues we have. Do you think you can help us with that? And then what do you need environment-wise to help you do this role? So it was a conversation with somebody. It wasn't can you give us an example of a time when, which, personally drives me crazy anyway. That's a whole nother podcast. And they were having a dialogue, which is really what we need to do. What do you need? Can you help in the first place? And if the answer was yes, I can, then that next part of that was, let's introduce you to the people you'd be working with. And again, how would you like to do this? What does that look like for you? And it's a learning piece. It's actually saying we can learn, and actually making some fairly simple adjustments most times will yield a really great result. And actually that individual feels included. And that's the equity piece again. What do you need to flourish, to feel included and to belong at Zurich or as part of our company? So I think that's where it's exciting. That's the exciting piece that we're doing now with Auticon and broadening that provision, is saying, help us help our people learn. That's what this is about. How can we learn? How can we broaden our experience to see the obvious? For me, it's obvious, but how do we do that?
I'm going to go next to WIllard. So this particular podcast is about the incredible innovative skills that many of our autistic community have. What would our community, if it was thriving in this, what would it look like? And what would it take to really make sure we don't miss people like you and G?
It takes education, awareness, and some of these kids, they need to have a little bit of safeguarding because they feel as though, some of them feel as though that their disability, their condition is against them.
Right, yes.
And because they think it's against them, they implode.
Yeah.
So they need people to talk to them, help them. And not like counselling, a bit like counselling, but not quite. Because as soon as you get the eyes to light up, then all the energy that's within them starts, that you never saw, starts to turn up. And if you can get through to 4 or 5, it's better than getting through to none at all.
Yeah.
Because some of them will be stuck in the mud.
Yeah.
That's another word I can use. I think that, and you need to pull them out and just say, look, this is what you can do.
Yeah.
And because if people make the world go around, they make things happen.
Maybe that is actually about being able to see yourself as a child and as a young adult, being able to see yourself represented. I think representation is really super important. And that's what because you said you hesitated over counselling, or in a way, what those young people need to see is people like you.
Yeah, it's not counselling. It's encouragement, really. Yeah. It's talking to them and saying things to them. If you get a boxer, for instance, and he's losing a fight, and then someone in the corner says, no, you must do this, or put your right hand up. Move around a little bit. Don't stand in one place and get hit. Move around, and then they listen to that advice and win the fight.
Yeah, a little bit of coaching. Let me just go to G then. G, what would we need to see happen in the future to help diversity to flourish, do you think, from your point of view?
I think we're already starting to see it. The conversation we've had today has been given some brilliant examples of that. We're talking about ways that we can create organizations and business structures and recruitment practices that become able to see the skills and the diamonds. Ultimately, we're creating this. Shelley said something interesting a moment ago. She actually said, why should we label anything? And when she said that, it just reminded me, within the autistic community, when I'm around my autistic friends, we don't see labels. I think this is one of the brilliant things about autistic minds is the way other people have categorized things means nothing. We just see what they are. We don't care what they're called.
Correct.
We don't care about any of the fluff around the edges or any of the things that can actually act as a barrier for other people. And so I think really one of the best things that we can do as the world of business starts to recognize what autistic people can bring to the workplace in terms of skills and abilities, but also about how they don't see those labels. We're talking about creating a world where those labels don't matter anymore. And actually, the autistic community have always done this. So it's as we get closer together, we're seeing more of that. And that is just beautiful.
Yeah, I love that. That's a really good point to bring out, that I guess if people don't understand, then labels are important to help people to understand. But we need to get to the point where when we meet someone, we go, oh, okay, yeah, I can see it. I can feel that you're autistic. You don't need to tell me. You don't need to announce it because I feel it. I know it. But that comes from people that have it within themselves, have read up, have lived amongst, have had that experience and that exposure. And that can only happen if we're opening doors for people, G.
Yeah, but I don't think it's necessarily about seeing someone and being with someone and saying, oh, I can tell that you're autistic. I know that. You don't need to tell me. I can feel it.
I mean,
it's more about recognizing that is, when you really get down to it, irrelevant. It's about being able to embrace the entire human being, regardless of whether they are autistic or not, or black or not, or trans or not. It's those things become irrelevant. And that's what I think autistic people can often innately be very good at doing, is just cutting through all of the labels and all of the explanations and the rules and all of that. We let go of that. It doesn't exist for us. And the more the wider world see people in that much more, I don't want to say labelless way, because as somebody who carries a lot of labels and as an activist myself, that's a very important element as well. But when it comes to the functional working of human beings, and when we're in a room together, those labels don't matter. When we are trying to create a solution or meet a business objective or whatever the thing is that we're doing, we need to be able to put the labels down and crack on with the job with the skill set that we have on hand.
I love it, G. That's the perfect way to finish. Thank you so much to my guests today, Shelley Ferris Smith, G. Sabini-Roberts, Kurt Schöffer, and WIllard Wigan. It's been a great show. Thank you.
Thanks, Carrie.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening. We really hope you enjoyed this episode of Autism in Conversation with Auticon. If you'd like to know more about the podcast, would be interested in applying for a job as an Auticon consultant, or would like further information about how Auticon can help support your business, please visit auticon.co.uk. This episode was recorded in September 2022. Recording and production was at Strathmore Studios in Clerkenwell, London. It was engineered and edited by Billy Godfrey, and music was by The Lethargies. That's all from us this time. Thanks again for listening, and bye for now.